Hello and welcome to Disrupt TV Show. Today, I'm Ray Wang, your co-host, your actual host today and co-host of Disrupt TV. We have a special episode 152 edition here. We got some special guests in a different format. We're actually going to go the full hour with our three guests. Disrupt TV is on live every week, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, and where we interview some of the most interesting folks talking about what's happening in technology, policy, what's happening in the startup world, what's happening with some interesting and famous authors, and of course, our special guests today. Today, we've got four special guests. We're going to do some quick introductions of the four of them first, and then we'll jump into and share with you our special co-host with me for the day. So our first guest is Keerthika Subramanian. She is the Senior Capital Market Associate at Mintz Levine. She's been there, Mintz, Levine, Cohn, Ferris, Klofsky, Papeo in Boston. And she is a visiting clinical lecturer also at the Yale Law School who teaches the Biotech Capital Markets course, and she previously practiced corporate and securities law in both New York City and Silicon Valley, and is a member of both the state bars of, actually all three state bars of California, Massachusetts, and New York. Our practice focuses on complex corporate transactions such as IPOs, follow-on offerings, M&As, venture financing, bond offerings, with an emphasis on advising clients in the following industries: biotech and life sciences, tech, and financial services. In her securities practice, she primarily represents investment banks in IPOs and follow-on offerings. In 2016, she advised the underwriters on a third of the 6 initial public offerings of SF-based, Silicon Valley-based technology companies. So she's also a global thought leader on data privacy and cybersecurity, along with C-level executives of the Fortune 500 companies. She's a founding member of the IEEE Fair Trade Data Initiative, which is one of the really coolest groups inside the IEEE at this moment, to set global standards governing the fair trade of internet, human, and personal data. And she's also a fellow at Humanity.co, a data privacy startup. In June 2019, she led the Transatlantic Steering Committee in the successful planning and execution of Disruptive Dilemmas Cyber Crisis Simulation Exercise. This is one of the largest side events at the GlobeSec 2019 Bratislava Forum, a top 5 international security conference worldwide. The groundbreaking event was co-sponsored by, among others, NATO, the Global Cyber Alliance, and the European Cyber Research Resilience Network, and she is a 2017 to 2018 German Marshall Memorial Fellow. Welcome, Keerthika. Awesome. And our next guest is Kristen Laughlin, founder and CEO of Avion Consulting Group. Kirsten has over a decade of experience working in the capital markets and global consulting spaces. She specializes in forging strategic partnerships and facilitating international investments in a variety of sectors, including healthcare, fintech, real estate, and technology. Working through a carefully cultivated network of key decision makers and market leaders in a variety of industries and locations throughout the world, her efforts have produced hundreds of millions of dollars in cross-border investments and increased revenue for clients. Now, prior to founding Avion in 2016, Kristin spent several years working in international business consulting and capital markets before moving to private equity, global PE funds in the real estate and healthcare spaces. Her frequent travels overseas, present to investors and business executives, led her to serve as an invited speaker and panelist at industry events on the topic of international marketing, business development, foreign investment, and capital raising. As a leader in community, Kristin is on the chair of the board of directors of a language immersion primary school, and she also tapped to receive the prestigious Marshall Memorial Fellowship through the German Marshall Fund of the United States, which she completed in 2018. Kristin is currently an advisor and an acceleration committee member of FinTech for Good and also a fellow for Humanity.org. She's also a founding committee member and current co-chair of Women on Corporate Boards training initiative backed by GMFUS, which is the Marshall Fund. She is also an alumni at Baldwin Wallace University, where she graduated summa cum laude with degrees in economics, international studies, and French. So, Kristin, welcome. Thank you for being on the show. And then we've got Nadja El Fertasi, CEO and founder of Nadja El Fertasi, EQ, Emotional Intelligence Coaching and Consulting out in Brussels, Belgium. Thank you for coming over from Europe. Nadja most recently worked as a senior executive at the NATO Comms and Information Agency, NCIA. NCIA is NATO's executive arm for cyber defense, drawing upon her nearly 2 decades of experience in a variety of leadership and policy planning positions at NATO. Nadja now helps diverse individuals and organizations around the globe navigate and maximize their EQ potential. Having closely worked with people from over 40 countries during her tenure at NATO, Nadja is uniquely skilled in fostering trust and understanding among diverse global stakeholders in both the public and private sectors across various industries. Nadja's clients include both individuals and organizations in the public and private sector, including SMEs and startups, and she offers a broad suite of services ranging from personality type and strength-based life coaching for individuals to help organizations design programs designed to promote soft skill development, resilience, stress management, managing unconscious bias, and fostering empathy in the workplace. Nadja offers all her clients the EQI 2.0 model assessment, which is the only scientifically validated survey on emotional intelligence in the world. She's also a creative and passionate problem solver and believes that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't always work. So she's a proven leader and alumni of the 2014 NATO Executive Development Program and also another alumni of the 2018 German Marshall Memorial Fellow Program. We're taking a lock on all those folks here. So Nadja is the co-chair also of the Transatlantic Steering Committee for Disruptive Dilemmas, the Cyber Crisis Simulation Exercise. She was also at the GlobeSec 2019 Bratislava Forum, a top 5 international security conference worldwide. Postgraduate from University of Cambridge in International Relations, fluent in English, Dutch, Arabic, and French, and a little bit of Italian German, it looks like here. So, all right, you can follow her on Twitter at Nadja El Fertasi and a DJ, a ELFERTASI, and then welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ray, for having us.
All right, and our last guest and my co-host for the show is Dr. David Bray, and he's the Executive Director of the People-Centered Internet, Faculty Impact and Disruption at Singularity University. And since 2017, we've known him in many roles. He's currently serving as the Executive Director of PCI, a coalition co-founded by Vint Cerf, one of the godfathers of the Internet, or the father of the Internet, depending who you talk to, and focused on providing support and expertise for community-focused projects that measurably improve people's lives using the Internet. Dr. Bray is both a WEF Young Global Leader, a faculty member of Singularity. He's also Chief Strategy Officer for the Advanced Geospatial company Map Large, and serves on the advisory boards of lots of companies espousing human-centric solutions. He's also a member of the Social Data Science Advisory Board at the Oxford Internet Institute, University of Oxford. Business Insider named Dr. Bray one of the top 24 Americans who are changing the world under 40, and he's a senior fellow with the Institute for Human-Machine Cognition. He has also served a variety of leadership roles in turbulent environments, including bioterrorism, preparedness, and response from 2000 to 2005, and humanitarian efforts in 2009. Executive Director for a Bipartisan National Commission on Research and Development in 2013, and as a nonpartisan senior executive where he received the Global CIO 100 Award in both 2015 and 2017. He was also named an Eisenhower Fellow and a Marshall Memorial Fellow, now we know where we got all these folks, to Europe following our transatlantic relations. You can follow his organization on Twitter at PCI_initiative. David, welcome to the show. Thanks for being my co-host today.
Thanks for having us, Ray. And as you see, we've brought the Marshall Memorial Fellowship has landed, and we are now planting our flag firmly with DisrupTV.
All right. Well, we've got this awesome set of guests, awesome set of experiences. David, I'm going to give you the first question to throw out to the team. We're going to run the moderation. It is a 1-hour show, so we're going to hit all these different topics, and I'll go ahead and start ahead. David, what do you have?
Sure. Actually, I'll go to both Nadja and Keerthika, and Nadja, maybe you first. So tell us a little bit about what was this event in GlobeSec, what was the idea to come make it happen, and how did you and Keerthika as co-chairs pull it all together?
Yes, thank you, David. So actually the idea came when we met all the European and US fellow in Washington. Keerthika had the idea in organizing a digital transatlantic boot camp in the years to come. And I wanted to do with some other European fellows a defense accelerator startup. So after talking for several months and phoning, we managed to come up with approaching several big think tanks, and GlobeSec liked the idea very much. We proposed the idea of having a crisis simulation, which would be the first of its kind. And this is how we came up to having the first ever inaugural cyber crisis simulation that included emotional intelligence. So I hand it over to Keerthika if she wants to add.
Yeah, so I think this is, like, as David mentioned, this is firmly planted. The GMF fellows are firmly planting our flag here today. This idea was partially born out of our experience in Europe as well. During my fellowship, I had the pleasure and honor of meeting with Anushka Kaushik. She's a cybersecurity research fellow at GlobeSec, and kept in touch with her. And she, was gracious enough to invite us to attend the forum this year and to organize this event. And it was the largest side event, and it was the first event of its kind. So very innovative, and very exciting to be working with this, transatlantic steering committee, both Europeans and Americans as well.
So thank you. And now I'm going to turn to Kristin and actually ask the question. So why should we care about transatlantic relations? I mean, can each country go for their own? Why does this matter? Be interested in your thoughts.
So I think the world is obviously getting smaller. And I think that, in the digital age, that it shrinks on a daily basis. So to ignore the importance of, any sort of international relationship, in this case transatlantic, would be, frankly, irresponsible. So the more that we are in communication with each other, cross-culturally, international, cross-border, cross-industry, the better we are able to take on whatever challenges new technologies and the changing world throw at us. And I think that our experience meeting all of each other at the Marshall Memorial Fellowship is just another forum for us to explore these themes and ideas and discuss ways of collaboratively problem solving.
Excellent. And Nadja, you're joining us from Europe. So can you give us a little bit more of the European perspective when it looks at the United States and North America? What do you find are the greatest points of maybe misunderstanding between Europe and North America as it relates to what was being done at GlobeSec and in general?
So I actually wanted to add that in my view, when you look at digital transformation and the innovation gap between the US and Europe, it's big. So this idea was born initially to how can we share the knowledge, how can we share the best practices, how can we learn from each other, right? Because I think the US is very much advanced in having these accelerators, these innovation hubs all over the United States, and it's a very risk-tolerant culture when it comes to tech innovation. As to Europe, Europe is not one country, it's several countries. So each country has different innovation levels and different risk tolerance. And I come from a security background, but innovation and tech is very important. But security, it's still very much a risk-averse environment that works with big prime contractor. When you look at the digital transformation, and especially cyber, the innovation niche is in the startups. But how do we fuse these together? It's a big challenge. So I think Europe can learn a lot from the US on how the US does this when they have these accelerators, these big companies and the startups and entrepreneurs, and creating a system where both startups can use the infrastructure from big prime contractors, but prime contractors can manage and can benefit the innovation from the smaller ones. And vice versa, I think also the US can learn from Europe on the diverse level of innovation and technology in dealing with as opportunities, and when we talk about technology for health, for addressing poverty, not only for, big security issues. So I think there's definitely a two-way street in working together and bridging this innovation gap, and not let the GDPR be the opposite of an incentive.
But I wanted to jump in here and say, look, I mean, we've got different threats though, right? Some of these are nation states, but a lot of these threats are like, we have no idea who these people are. They're not even nation states, right? They're like organizations. And some of these threats also come from corporations too, that are actually posing threats on individuals as well. So when we build these transatlantic alliances, what does that mean, right? What does that mean for, like, how do we organize against these threats? If it's just nation states that are coming against it, does it include organizations, nonprofits? Does it include other corporates as well?
I'll go ahead and take that. So I think what was particularly innovative about our program, right, was that we included stakeholders from both the public sector, the private sector, and our simulations were carefully tailored to make sure that we had the voices and viewpoints of all constituencies well represented. So the first, we had 4 different simulations. So the first one, was actually about the rising threat of AI in the context of facial recognition technology, and sort of what are the various ethical issues and other challenges that we have to consider. And, so that was one of them. And so obviously that, that's an area where there's a lot of potential for both public and private cooperation, in addition to having the cooperation of countries around the globe. The second crisis simulation, and I'll let my colleague Kristin talk more about this, but this was about sort of the cybersecurity risks inherent in, in the investment context, right? When you're looking at sort of the corporate finance world generally, cybersecurity is becoming more and more of a threat and more of a risk that companies are having to consider when making these investment decisions, right? And oftentimes, if you don't have enough, protections in place, like, cybersecurity issues may potentially jeopardize transactions from getting completed. So that was the second cyber crisis simulation that we put together. The third one was about cyber workforce development issues, right? And how do we, sort of globally, but also within nations, specifically, promote policies that will eventually, create very competent and capable cyber workforce. And so I think that's a challenge that all countries around the world are facing, both the United States and abroad. And the last one was about sort of disinformation and foreign election interference, and how do we use cyber and other like technologies such as AI to successfully combat disinformation, right? I think it can be used as a weapon. I think it can be used to promote disinformation, but I think there's also potential for it to be used to, help effectively combat that risk. So, the point is that we had something for everyone, right? And we had all the voices and perspectives well represented in Bratislava.
And if I may just add, I think to your question also is the public-private partnerships, right? I think we live in an age where we need to cross-collaborate between, it's not only more state to state, but it's state to other subnational, private sector, civil society. So how do you bring all these sectors and societies and it's a civil military cooperation dealing with the disruptive challenges in the digital age? Which we've exercised through this crisis simulation at GlobeSec.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, go ahead, Kristin.
Yeah, to add to that, actually, so when we were collecting feedback from some of the participants directly after the event, one gentleman was explaining that he's in a policy-making role in his day job and isn't often able to collaborate with practitioners who are working within the policies that he is actually forming. So he sort of said, this is actually a really great exercise. I think that we need to do these types of things more often because it allows us to see the other perspective. So the practitioners seeing how the policies are developed and the policy developers seeing how they're actually implemented in real life, and having both groups involved in solving real world crises was, I think, beneficial for all involved.
Wow, so it basically gave them feedback loops that they can actually see how each other do the interaction, which is something that you normally don't get to see.
Correct.
Wow, okay, wonderful. So when we think about this, right, this simulation, right, as part of the events, what were the big takeaways when you think about the simulation aspect? Because, it's the first time people are getting together for this, like how to get set up. Do people come back saying, this was great, we're going to try 5 other things? Do people say, oh my God, this is completely overwhelming, how does this happen? What's the reactions to folks running and in those simulations? So.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start off on this one. So I think that when we think about the cyber context generally, there's three things that come to mind as cyber practitioners. There's risk mitigation, there's risk management, and there's attribution, right? And so I think, when you're conceptualizing where our cyber crisis simulation falls within that, I would argue that it falls within sort of the risk mitigation piece, right? And I think that we can all of my colleagues will agree that cyber crisis simulation exercises should be an integral part of every organization's cyber preparedness strategy or the risk mitigation strategy, right? And that, we should be very proactive in dealing with cyber, security issues, as opposed to being reactive, which is sort of the risk management piece of it. So one of the key takeaways was that, we should focus more on risk mitigation in addition to risk management, but also focus more on attribution, which I understand from, Nadja is becoming a very hot topic, in the public sector in addition to the private sector.
And if I may add, I think the other big takeaway was, and it's the first time it's been used, is the use of emotional intelligence. Often we don't think about when we collaborate, it's the human machine. And when you have different sectors and different disciplines and generational diversity as well, as human beings, we are unable to trigger our emotions, especially during heightened crisis. So how do you teach people to recognize how their emotions influence problem solving, decision making, stress tolerance, reality testing? These are all important elements and more in composing a very diverse and capable crisis team that comes up with the best desired outcome for the solution. I think especially in terms of crisis, emotional intelligence is key to be developed and leveraged during cyber crises or any other crises. So I think this was another key takeaway for the participants in how do you fuse not only the IQ part, but also the EQ. IQ is the elevator and EQ is the trajectory upwards, actually.
So Nadja, you're basically telling us we can actually rethink and create some self-awareness so that we don't make rash decisions that we wouldn't have made in other situations, or depending on the scenarios, understanding our way of elevation or escalation in terms of the decisions that we make.
Yeah, so our own awareness, for example, if someone has a low impulse control, and especially during crises, so the delay between the triggering of the emotion and the response, if it's very low, you have this very rash decision, as you see all the times with politicians on TV. And if somebody else has, for example, low assertiveness level, and they need to speak up and make a decision during a crisis, is going to be difficult. So to be aware of your own emotions and how to leverage them and use them differently, but also of the people around you. And then you are able to take it less personal and become more rational, right? Because all the information we take comes up to the limbic system where the information is processed before it goes to the rational part of the brain. So emotional intelligence is, I think, key, especially in the age of digital transformation.
Well, especially when we want to extract idea from experts who might be too quiet, right? The self-awareness works the other way. I mean, we might have a great idea that might not be fully developed because someone doesn't know how to react in that scenario.
Exactly. Or if somebody is under stress, a lot of people, they go in fight or flight mode. So they only add then their prefrontal cortex of the brain. They don't access all the information. So when they understand that, because the feeling of anxiety is exactly the same as the feeling of excitement. So what you tell yourself will turn that around. And I think really emotional intelligence can really unlock human potential, full potential in the digital age.
Wow.
So,
Good.
What Nadja was saying, because I think this is very key to our digital era. It gets to the question you asked, Ray, in terms of, we're no longer dealing with nation states. To channel the line from Soylent Green, it's people. That all organizations, whether they be in the public sector or private sector, are people. And these events are impacting people. Now, I think there needs to be awareness, particularly for why Europe and why North America cares. We're seeing more and more events, without going into specifics. There's an example of where a video was uploaded of a politician that was not real, but there was a social media platform that was debating whether or not it should be taken off. And that's a case where nothing's gone wrong hardware or software-wise, but now you've created this public controversy as to what you can do about it. And in a lot of cases, that's probably going to play in not just into the emotions of people, but also into the partisan fervor that people have as well. And that's a case where you need your cybersecurity experts not just to be experts on the IQ part of what's going on with the technology and everything like that, but to be aware of the audience too, because my concern is we may be seeing things more and more in Europe and North America where they're open societies, where it's actually a two-level, I want to say, sort of attack. One is the attack that tries to disrupt or create confusion or create something that's polarizing, that divides people. But then two, the second level is actually trying to get people to say, oh, wait, maybe we should start censoring things. Maybe we should take things offline. Maybe we should actually start thinking about a firewall around countries or things like that, or a walled garden for the internet. And I worry because for open societies to start having those conversations that say, do we need to actually basically have things sort of being censored or doing firewalls around them, or even talking about like a national identity system online, that may be becoming more like the more totalitarian regimes, and that may be their end goal, is not just to polarize us, but to make us behave in such a way that we become more like them.
Yeah, it's true. It's a two-pronged strategy to use content to work against our freedom and our open societies. We're definitely seeing that exercise as they start to realize there are opportunities for both solutions and development of those ideas.
So I think once the board becomes more aware of both the risk that they face, but then also the challenges of this, you do see more committed action towards it. And I think the way I would say it is 3 to 4, maybe even 5 years ago, no one would go before a board of a company and say, what's a P&L, what's profit and loss? I don't understand that. That would be something you'd have to know before you go to the board, else the board would look at you very oddly. But at the same time, 3 to 4 years ago, if you went before a board and said, and the board member said, I don't know what a DMZ is, or I don't know what a firewall is, or things like that, that was considered okay because that was a highly technical subject, and somehow the board didn't need to have understanding. And again, I'm not saying everybody in the board needs to have the technical depth, but I think even to this day, both in terms of boards, but also in terms of how the popular press covers things, what they call things, and things like that, this is a challenge in that these are very technical subjects, yet they impact us all. And the reality is we're all impacted. In fact, I think for me, my biggest source of concern is nobody would ask a small business or a startup to buy a surface-to-air missile to defend against physical nation-state threats. Yet we somehow think it's perfectly okay for you to go on the internet as a startup or a small business and be at risk to a nation-state, possibly stealing your IP or something else. And so there's this asymmetry in which you may not be able to hire all the talent necessary to know everything that's going on, but the board has to at least take responsibility for saying this is a risk that we face, and it's something that we have to at least be adequately prepared and have asked the right questions before something goes on, and then if something does go on, be able to at least defer to the right experts as to what's occurring.
Yeah, that's jokingly aside, I thought it was going to be a PC-matic ad where we can just install that and use a whitelist and we'd be okay. No, just kidding. No, I love it, guy.
There's only one website to visit, and I won't say what the website is, but then you're good after that. So.
David mentions a really important point. I think when we're talking about cybersecurity investment, I think companies of all sizes, both private and public, are investing significant financial resources into cybersecurity preparedness because of the intellectual property, angle, right? I think whether, irrespective of whatever industry you are in, you are likely to have IP of some kind, whether it's trade secrets or whether it's patents. And I think that a lot of companies are investing a lot of money to make sure that their IP, which is a significant value and asset in their company, is not stolen by rogue actors, right?
But, in a lot of cases, it could even be corporates that are stealing from each other in their corporate espionage units. And the question I have for you is, what about the offense capabilities that people are looking at as well? Because we're seeing a lot of this is all reactive defense capabilities. We're seeing offense capabilities actually take center stage as well. Was there a discussion about that and what that role was, or what the ethical use of was for offense cybersecurity? So offensive cybersecurity, that's just offensive, but anyways.
So there was a discussion of that particular point at GlobeSec, right? But I think you bring up an important point more generally about, sort of how, companies go on the offense against this. More often we talk about this sort of in a reactionary or defensive way. But I think, I think the corporate laws within the United States, at least, I think that there would be severe penalties for companies that pursued sort of offensive strategies using cyber to, unlawfully obtain the IP of other corporate actors, right? So I think from a legal perspective, I think that our laws are there to address that. That being said, I mean, are the laws adequate to address every single nuance of that potential situation? Likely not, right? So I think we're likely to see, issues of first impression from a legal perspective, in the coming years.
And if I may add, from a broader security perspective, I think it's a very difficult question, because the lines are very blurred between defensive and offensive, right? Both defensive cyber strategies can be offensive at the same time as well. So you have the issue of attribution as well, which is very difficult, especially when you have non-state actors and state actors that are both on the same way. So I think regulation, I think there was talk about this digital convention, or the ethical use is a very important part of discussions, which is why you need all these sectors included when we talk about cyber. Cyber is not just technical, cyber is not just military, cyber is not just private, cyber is everything. Unfortunately, it's like DNA in our cells, right? So when you have solutions, you need to have everyone there, because talking just about defensive cyber can also be offensive in order to protect yourself. I mean, this is the debate in security arena now. How do you deal with attribution? So having all the stakeholders involved in really understanding the problem first. We were even unable to define what does cyberspace look like? What are the real challenges? What is the impact on different sectors? And then come up with the solutions for that problem, and which will be different for each sector.
So I'm going to build on what was said, but I also, just to make things a little bit more lively, try to be a little bit more provocative and say, I think if there's anything that distinguishes a nation state from a private company, it's that I don't think private companies at the moment should get involved in offensive cyber. I realize there are companies that may do that. Ideally, they should do that in coordination with the nation state, because here's why. I mean, Nadja mentioned attribution being difficult to do online. A really sophisticated actor could make it look like you were attacked from a source, and then when you go back and do something offensive to them, you're actually hitting the wrong person. You know, I'm sure if you've never had more than like 3 siblings and you're in the car, and so, you know, one of your siblings gets, Joe to punch you and say, Joe punched you, but in fact you were holding Joe's hand. You could easily start a tete-a-tete between 2 actors that were completely innocent, but you've involved them in this. And so
we grew up with 5 children, so completely resonates.
You completely understand, yeah, I mean, exactly. So I think you have to be very cautious, because unfortunately, and I can say this because I work for VentSurf, I mean, the internet was not designed to do attribution well. The identity layer was left off of TCP/IP. And so we're trying to now bolt things on to try and triangulate and figure out where it's coming from and the identity of these things and whether they're human or not human. But TCP/IP, when it was first rolled out, and even to this day, does not have an identity layer. And so you have to be very cautious, because when you go after something, ideally you're using other sources, not just the online information, other things you can get from, whether it's more clandestine assets or things like that, that only nation states can do to do the attribution. But by and large, most private companies will not have the resources necessary to say definitively it came from source X.
It's okay. We'll all do it on Facebook and Tencent. Nobody will notice.
Exactly. Or you can tweet about it. I hear some people tweet about whether they're going to do something or not do something in terms of missile strikes. That could work for cybersecurity, right?
It's amazing. It's so efficient. Anyways, so cool. We have some other great questions here. I think, David, you were pulling some here that were interesting. Let's talk about EQ. What were we talking about here? So.
Yeah, actually, maybe Kristin might be able to talk a little bit about EQ and how it plays into both GlobeSec, but also transatlantic. I'd be interested in Kristin's thoughts about that.
I will, of course, defer to our resident expert here, Nadja. But no, I think as she was saying earlier, we are all people, and people come with emotions, and people come with different backgrounds. And what we observed during the crisis simulations were very much these different personalities and different norms coming into play. I'll ask my colleagues to chime in, but just observing how different people approached problem solving in general, just based on their personalities and what they're basically how they're used to operating was absolutely fascinating. So there were those who jumped right in. There were those who took a step back. Nadja will definitely be able to weigh in on this in more detail, but I think having people actually then go through at the end and recognize how their individual personalities and traits factored into the processes that they used was enlightening for them. I know that every time I've gone through an exercise like that myself, it's always interesting. It's a very interesting mirror to look into, and I think that it's an important one for anyone who's in a field where you are involved in real world problems, real world crises, because it allows you to navigate your way through that particular problem, knowing that you are coming at it from a specific angle. But again, I will defer to Nadja, our resident EQ master.
And Kristen, before we do that, was it like a casting call? Like you literally were looking there and like all these different characters you'd expect, in a cybersecurity simulation, like the reactions and the range of reactions. Did it feel like that? Like
no, it was absolutely fascinating. So you had the individuals who jumped right in. You had we should have probably added, we did this via random selection. So when the attendees came into the room, they were given a number, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So they were mixed in with individuals they've never met before. They were put in positions to solve crises in industries that they weren't necessarily experts. So the group dynamic was a fascinating one to observe. People figuring out who was in the group, what personalities were in the group, and then how to start working through the challenges with their designated group.
Got it. It sounds like a good team building exercise. You jump in, do crisis comms on a cybersecurity attack.
Well, actually, I may build on the excellent points made by Kristin, because Kristin touched upon not only EQ, but also personality type preferences, right? Because it also depends in what kind of culture you're doing it. There are cultures who are very comfortable in being assertive or being less assertive and not wearing a mask, right? And it's so important in crises to understand also your own map of the world, your unconscious bias, what David spoke about. What I also do in designing crisis simulations is use personality type role plays. So it allows the people to participate in the crisis, choose a personality type, what are their preferences, what are their character strengths, what are their personal and professional characteristics, and how will they react. So it forces any participants to step out of their own map of the world and develop a conscious awareness of someone else, which creates empathy, which creates a new mental model, as you like, to gain experiences, which is why these crisis simulations are so important to build a human resilience in the digital age, but also human diversity. Because we all know when we have diverse teams working together, there is friction, and friction is healthy. But how do you help people to collaborate and to deal with the friction? So implementing the diverse collaboration.
So we're talking like forming, storming, norming, performing, like in real time, right? As people are watching all those different characteristics kind of jump in, and it's like.
Well, it's funny what you mentioned, because obviously we had curveballs, so you could see people. They were like, okay, we finally got a solution, and then we would give them a curveball, and they will like, completely be WTF. And what now? But that because this is life, right? In crises, you have surprises. So how do you deal with it on the spots? And you can practice it in order to build this resilience and to build these immediate responses for the situation.
The reason this is kind of interesting is I kind of thinking like we have this ambient experience summit. We're getting chief customer officers, right, marketers, and digital folks together in Atlanta in February, and like I'm looking for a team building exercise, and it should be your site has just been hacked. Let's just do a cybersecurity issue, like kind of walk them through a crisis analysis, right, as a team building exercise, randomly pair them off and say, yeah, welcome to the event.
Yeah, there's that, and you could also do misinformation, Ray. Doesn't even have to be physically compromised. Just start doing misinformation about your brand. How are you going to respond?
Yep, exactly. So
the more you say it, because Nadja mentioned that the research shows presenting people with more facts once their mind is made up doesn't change their mind. Confirmation bias kicks in. Similarly, saying X is not true, nobody remembers the not part. They just remember the X part. And so you're actually recycling the meme that's incorrect by simply saying X is not true. And so this would be a great question to ask your people at the event in terms of how do you handle it if there's a misinformation about your brand in a way that actually gets out of the mud. And sometimes maybe the answer they may discover is you just try to do your best to power through and let your own integrity show. But the more and more you try to add verbally to it, it's not going to help.
Yeah, and one last thing, actually, Ray and David, on what makes people work better together, even if they're diverse. It's like the military, right? The military, they would kill for each other because they are in it together. There's one goal, one mission, one team. And when you have these crises, people are in the same boat. So it doesn't matter whether they're from different backgrounds, different perspectives. When they are together in the crisis, you often see a very human collaboration as they are trying to achieve the same goals, which is why actually team building is best done by crises and giving them curveballs.
I'm actually thinking about this, right? You know, we kick off a conference with like, you know, this kind of simulation exercises. Guests who never met each other, you know, jump in, and it could be very, very fun. So, okay, well, quick question here. Why is this human resilience really important in the digital age, right? You know, especially when dealing with security crisis, and kind of define resilience in your own way. I'll kind of start with you, Tirthika. So.
I think so. That's interesting. Like resilience, I feel like is becoming a hot topic, sort of in the business world, but also the corporate law world too. I think because in the era of digital transformation, that means that people have BlackBerries, they have iPhones, and so at least from my own perspective, lawyers are constantly we need to always be on, right? For lack of a better word, we need to always be available to our customers, to our clients, and make sure that transactions and their needs are met. And this is true for all these industries too. I think before we used to have like a 9-to-5 workday, right, in the US. Now these days, who's actually working 9 to 5, right? Very few people, right? And so I feel like this need to constantly be available through digital means is causing a certain level of stress, right? And it's causing, in some cases, burnout, right? I think we saw a few weeks ago that the World Health Organization formally declared and recognized that burnout is a real medical condition. And so I think that so I guess my point would be that we're extremely productive as a result of all this technology we have, right? Because we are able to do work wherever we are. But the downside of that is that we're perhaps less resilient, right? Because it's placing more and more demands on people's time, which is in part impacting their health. So, this renewed focus on resilience, I think, is one that is long overdue, honestly. And I'm glad that our event was able to, touch on resilience.
Amazing.
If I may add very quickly, there was even a study done on the cyber workforce, right? When you think of the cyber, so the ethical cyber hackers or the people that are monitoring such a long hours and they're being constantly attacked, this really, and especially when you look at cyber workforce, which is very thin, right? By I think 2030, we have a huge shortage. So the demand on the cyber workforce is huge, but they're still humans. Yeah. There's still, there's only so much you can take. So how do you help not only build a human resilience, but also create systems that allow the human and machine to work so well together, and in order to build a more holistic resilience and to decrease these levels of burnout? Because also the World Health Organization predicts that by 2030, the biggest silent killer at the workplace is depression and burnout. Because we live in a society where people are supposed to wear masks and they've not learned how to deal with their emotions and how to actually manage their energy. And this is a very important discussion, especially as we move into the digital age. If you don't know how to, if you continuously output energy, and you don't know how to input energy, and you don't know how your emotions are actually regulating yourself, and you're just suppressing them, it's like holding a glass of water for 1 hour, it'll be fine. After a full day, your arm will be paralyzed. So can you imagine how, if people are holding these stresses and emotional blockages for so long, they will collapse.
That's okay. I'm going to keep grabbing your screen time.
So actually, if I could build on what Nadja and Keerthika said, and Kristin said it a little bit earlier, and actually then ask a question of the three of them. The comment was actually Tom Malone at the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, Anita Woolsey, and others have done research that have shown groups make better decisions when 3 factors are present in those groups. Factor 1 is when there's equal turn taking as part of the conversation. Factor 2 is when there's active listening, when you can repeat back what other people said so you were actually listening to it. And the third is actually a higher ratio of women to men. So with that said, given how usually the cybersecurity field is mainly male dominated, yet the 4 of us, when we were pulling this together, I was actually the minority as the only guy, and there were 3 of you. Could you each share your perspectives about both what you brought to the cybersecurity conversations at GlobeSec, and what would be your hope for just in general diversity, both in this field and other fields, and people recognizing that there is value in not everyone seeing the world through the same way or thinking the same way. Maybe Nadja, if you want to go first, then Kristin, and then Keerthika, you can have the last word.
Yeah, thank you for this important question, because I think we are an excellent example of not only gender diversity, but also ethnic diversity and also different sector diversity. And I think what made us work really well, we understood our personality type preferences. Now, I always joked with Keerthika, because anyone who knows the Myers-Briggs type indicator, Keerthika is a big J. She's lists, structures, and control. I am the opposite. I am big thinker. I don't have eye for detail. My head's in the clouds. But we understood that, right? And Kristin, actually, she's very uniquely positioned and really kept us in balance, because she's able to do both. And when we understood, and then you have, your highly intellectual capacity. We understood each other's strengths and we build on that. And I'm very personally, but I think I can speak of all, really proud to be part of not only gender diverse. It's not so much about women and men for me, but how we really made it work together. We understood our unique strengths, our blind spots as well, and we worked as a team to make this happen. And I'm really proud that we showed the example that it is possible. That both men and women from all sectors, from all backgrounds, from all nations can do tech and cybersecurity and well.
Wow.
Well said.
Yeah.
Kristin?
Adding to that, so something else that I think was unique about our group, and David, I apologize for leaving you out of this real quick, but we three ladies each come from, in our day jobs, industries that tend to be, where women tend to be underrepresented. So Nadja, security and defense, Keerthika, corporate law, myself, financial services. So I think something that made this extra special was sort of the ability for us to, bridge what we're used to doing in our day jobs and bring sort of that representation into the cybersecurity exercise as well. So I think, it was an absolutely wonderful experience. We absolutely adored having David as the gentleman representative as well, I should say. But yeah, I think it was, and actually referencing a speaker that we had at our event, Dr. Berti. So it was, in fact, women were very well represented within our crisis simulation exercise group.
Excellent. And Keerthika?
Yeah, so it was an honor, honestly, to be with my esteemed colleagues. We're, representing various aspects of diversity. One thing that we have not touched on, in addition to gender diversity and also ethnic diversity, is generational diversity, right? And I think, in our group, I think that we, different generations are represented, but also I think that was not something we strove for in the event itself, right? And our participants, were both spanned several generations. And I think that that's particularly helpful, right, in thinking about cultivating a cyber workforce and thinking about these challenges, because, policymakers today, they may not necessarily be around tomorrow to actually see the effects of the policies they implement, right? So it's really, vital that we have, people of all ages represented in a policy-making sort of capacity.
I was scared you're going to devour my age.
Classified information. No, that's a state. Well, I have to say, I was, it was a wonderful team, and I'm really excited to see what does next. But I also think it does embody that I think more and more the nature of work is, yes, recognizing the individual matters and the individual strengths matter and nurturing the individual, but also thinking about how in an age of just so much information and such a tsunami of data being thrown our way, and the fact that we do have to work across sectors, how can we have teams or crews that bring across different perspectives and views? Because the reality is we're stronger together as a team than we are by ourselves.
Indeed. No, definitely very important. Well, hey, quick, let's jump to lightning round. What do we have? With some lightning round questions here. And I think really is when you, after going through this exercise, taking your industry perspectives, thinking about the EQ aspects that are going on, the people that you've met, and what are we there? Are we going to be okay if we look into 2025? Like, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic in terms of our ability to make a better future. So I'll just go down the line. What do you think, Nadia? Yes or no, and why?
So I am pessimistic because there's a lot of work to be done in making this a priority. I am optimistic because I have a huge business market.
Huge demand.
For implementing emotional intelligence.
A lot of work ahead, profit ahead, and hopefully we'll get there. So, all right, cool. All right, good to you, Kristen.
I guess I would say optimistic. I think Nadia is gonna, fix us all. So we'll be working efficiently and collaboratively to solve the challenges in 2025. So
awesome. Very good. Keerthika, what do you think?
So I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm gonna bridge what Nadia said and sort of the cautiously optimistic. I'm kind of a glass half full person, so let's go with cautiously optimistic for the moment. I think the three key areas that I am most focused on sort of in looking at 2025 from my perspective as a corporate attorney are sort of disclosure issues, right? When do companies disclose cybersecurity and incidents? What is the guidance and regulations? What's that going to look like in 2025, honestly, right? The second thing I'm looking at sort of is cyber preparedness, right? If you look at financial institutions, like we have the stress tests of banks, right? Are we going to have a mandatory cybersecurity stress test? Or are companies going to require that they have cybersecurity simulations that's something similar to what we've put together, right? So what does cyber preparedness, exercises look like in 2025? And the last thing I'm interested in is sort of the innovation aspect of it too, like small and medium-sized enterprises. How do we make sure that the startups of the world are cyber prepared when they don't have the necessary financial resources that mature public companies do, right? So those are the three things I'm looking at from my perspective.
Wow, I can definitely see that happening. This is great. Well, we'll check up on you guys in 2025 when this happens.
Can I actually give my real quick ad, Ray? I would say, I think I probably balance all three views here and say, pragmatically, I am hopeful because humans always adapt, but I am pessimistic partly because of the work that needs to be done and because open societies that separate their private from their public sector, which I support being done, are at a disadvantage in this space than autocracies that don't separate their private from their public sector. Clearly, I hope we don't become autocracies, but we've got to figure out a way to up our game, else the next 10 years might be pretty dark.
Wow. All right. The last word from Dr. David Bray. And of course, a comment from Andrew Nebus, talking about design in an earlier conversation. User-centric design has to include on inclusiveness folks that are impacted, those building or the long tail audiences, not just the people that are poking at keyboards or touchscreens on an application. So it's just something to share with you guys there. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Keerthika, Kristin, and of course, Nadia, and of course, my co-host for today, Dr. David Bray. This is episode 152 for DisrupTV show. Thanks for being on the show, everybody.
Thank you, Ray.
For having us. Thank you.
Very, very cool. And so we're going to be talking about what's happening in episode 153 when my co-host Vala Afshar joins me. We'll be talking to Juri Kalana, author of Reboot, Leadership and the Art of Growing Up. And then more importantly, we'll be talking to Jay Farrow, Ultimate CIO. He's now at the CIO at QuickReach. And of course, our own Diane Hinchcliffe, a VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. You'll be catching up on episode 153. So talk to you guys soon. All right.